television and theatre productions. Some of her many notable roles include the British sitcom The Thick of It, the Channel 4 series No Offence, Requiem in 2018, the Hulu series The Handmaid's Tale, to name but very few. She was nominated for 3 BAFTA TV awards for Getting On, including 2 for Best Writing. In March 2022, she received the BAFTA Award for Best Actress in a Leading Role for the film After Love. In 2023, very importantly, she became an honorary fellow of Queen's College, having studied history here at Queen's as an undergraduate. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in warmly welcoming the one and only Joanna Scanlan.
Thank you, Anna. Thank
and
you so much.
And Bosa's joining you in the front row.
Come to our fire.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's really a special honor.
It's my pleasure.
You are known for your versatility as an actress and ability to portray a very diverse range of characters with depth and nuance across many genres. How do you decide on your roles? How do they resonate?
Firstly, I must say it is an amazing honor to be sitting in this chair. A long time since I arrived in this room matriculating in 1980. And even then, it remained in my mind a sort of sanctum, a kind of very special place in the college. And I love the fact that you have inaugurated these Angevin talks and you've chosen this as your space. It's not the easiest space to play. It reminds me of a production I did of Carol Churchill's play Cloud 9, where we were on a revolve, and we never knew exactly where the revolve was going to be at the point that we got to a joke. And then one's head we had to kind of turn different directions at different. It is a beautiful historic space, obviously, and we have some queens, I think, probably,
we do.
To look at, to listen, please listen. So much, and thank you, Anna, for inviting me. Thank you to Mohammed, to all the people, Sneha and everybody else in the who put this together. It's really a wonderful thing to be part of. Roles, I don't know that I choose them. I think they choose me. I mean, that's, I often think that acting remains the last vestige of serfdom in Europe, because it is unlike any other job. There are no sort of HR aspects to it, and you are not allowed, once you're under contract, you are not allowed to go and do what you want to do. It is a very strange thing. You can't be ill. You can't, go to a funeral or be there at the birth of your child necessarily, unless obviously you're the one having the child. But even then. So it is a strange profession. And I think there's a lot of mythology and marketing around particularly filmmaking, which builds it into this world in which actors select their lives and become the arbiters of their own existence. And actually, I don't think that is generally the case, or it doesn't feel like that for most people. That said, I have always had one watchword in what I've chosen, or how I've gone about choosing, which is the word, and of course it comes in many manifestations, of quality. Now, that's very difficult to quantify. There's no metrics for quality as such. But I think for me, it's been about usually the people, their intentions, first and foremost. So I have never really been concerned by the scale of the project, but I've always been concerned by the intention behind the project. And of course, it's a commercial world generally that I'm in, although I do try not to make any distinction, really. I don't make any distinction between what I think of as participation and community practice and professional practice. To me, they're pretty much the same thing, actually.
It's common. You are a big proponent of community theatre and all that it brings to the community, and so I understand. So you moved to Wales with your family.
Yes.
When you were rural Cheshire.
Yeah, I was born in a town called West Kirby, which is on the Wirral, and is a sort of lovely dormitory for Liverpool business life, or at least that's what it was when I was born there in 1961. And it looks out over to North Wales, and I think my mother just kept looking over the Dee estuary, and wanted to move to Wales.
And you were 3 or 4 years old?
3, yes.
3. How do you recall your early years?
We moved to a house that was sort of attached to a farm. There was nobody around, no people to speak of. There was the farm up the lane when there were 2 children in that household, and there was another farm adjacent which also had 2 children. And otherwise there was nothing. And there was a moment in my childhood when the lovely farmer's wife, who did the milk round, in those days you didn't have to have pasteurized milk. You could just, have what's now fashionably known as raw milk. And so we had raw milk from her farm, and all the children got a form of salmonella from the milk. And then the local authority put us into quarantine for 6 solid months. We were not allowed to go to school, and we were not even allowed to go into the local village. So this is what I most remember as my childhood, because it was bliss, absolute bliss, although it defined something of my future, because I think I never quite caught up with maths after that point. It was and nature and the 3 or 4 children around. One very strong memory is, and dogs, mini dogs. One very strong memory was, for my brother and I, for entertainment, would wander to the bottom of the lane, stand on the stand where the milk churns were put to be collected every day, eat gooseberries off a bush that was built in. And we went back recently, and that gooseberry bush is still there.
Wow.
That would be an excitement. We would wait maybe a couple of hours for a car.
Good.
Boarding school, that's a sort of contradiction in terms, isn't it? Why would you need to board if you're local?
Right.
But my parents wanted, I think they wanted me to have a Catholic education. They're a very Catholic family, and they wanted me to have a Catholic education. And to be honest, they were in their 20s. They were very young. And I think they wanted to socialise and have a nice time in the week. And I think my mother was actually struggling with what it was to be a mother. Right. I think she really never quite recovered from giving up work when she was, 21 or 22, because it was conventionally the thing she was asked to do. So I think she really didn't enjoy being a mother of small children. Right. And I think that's a big area of life that I haven't had children myself, but a lot of my friends who have had children have had to unpack a lot of that identity shift and change
Different
that happens at
considerations.
that stage.
So you were boarding you were at boarding school during the week, and you'd come home for weekends?
Yes, from 6 till 9.
6 till
And
9.
then at 9, I went to another Catholic school, Newhall in Essex, when that was obviously not, there was no coming home at the weekends. That was too far.
Right.
Yeah.
So how did that form your early years and your life, boarding school?
Well, I think it helped me learn to socialise. I mean, I've always been somebody who's loved people and had lots of, got on with people and had a lot of friendships. And friendship has been a real blessing in my life. And school, I think it also taught me to repress a lot of unwelcome emotions that just simply weren't possible to experience in the context of girls' boarding school dormitories and, just the sort of marshalling of the day which needs to take place. And I think that, in terms of creativity, that's been quite interesting because all those feelings which were not necessarily managed as a child, as soon as I was playing a character, I was permitted to express. So for me, acting for many, many years was just a way of being the real me, the authentic emotions of, the unwelcome so-called negative emotions of anger or rage or jealousy or all those feelings. As soon as I was in a character, I was allowed to express them, be them, enjoy them, and feel the power of that.
But were you a model student? Were you rebellious?
How were you? I'm afraid I was extremely bad at school, very, very naughty indeed. Managed to, the school in Essex, I'm afraid, out of the Catholic options. And I was sent to an Anglican school much closer to home, again boarding, which was a lovely, lovely school where there was a lot of drama and music and sport and a lot of extracurricular activities, but wasn't a hugely academic school. And I just wanted to make as much fuss as I possibly could. I would wake up every morning and think, right, what is the set of what I considered inappropriate or irrelevant rules that I was going to break that day? And then I would set about doing it. And then I would set about being as visibly punished as possible. I really felt sort of Joan of Arc, kind of, I felt like I was taking on a crusade for everybody else to smash these ridiculous rules. And I gradually began to realize the value of petty rules is that you can take characters like myself who are just, acting up, and actually it doesn't do you that much harm, does it, to go from house to school without a coat? It's not the end of the world. Whereas if the only rule is don't get pregnant and don't, have intravenous drugs, then those would have been the ones I broke. I was just looking for rules to break.
Was that looking for attention, per se?
It wasn't quite attention. It was more this sense of self-righteousness. It was that I'm right and everybody else is wrong. And I want to prove to the staff and the powers that be that they've got it wrong and I'm correct.
So you finished high school very rebellious.
A very strange thing happened to me. It was in the lower sixth. I woke up one morning and I can actually, I can feel the memory of this. And I thought, do you know what? I cannot be bothered today to break rules. It was so much energy. It was exhausting. And I often think I used up a great deal of my energy, my chi for the rest that was there for the rest of my life. I used a lot of it up breaking all those rules. And I woke up one morning and thought, I just cannot be bothered. I'm going to put my coat on as I walk down from house to school and conform. And then 2 years later, I was made head girl.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's not really public knowledge.
No, it's really strange, isn't it?
That's amazing.
Yes. I still carried on smoking and drinking as head girl, but I managed to conceal it by then.
When did you learn?
Of course, I was surrounded by Welsh speakers,
Right.
and there was obviously the usual little, learning swear words and singing all the hymns and so forth in Welsh, but I didn't speak. Not in the 70s. It was big 60s. 60s. It was the growth of renewing of the Welsh language was starting as part of many other kinds of movements. And then by the 70s, that was becoming instituted. But by then, I was just a little bit too far down the line.
Yeah.
And I so regret that I didn't do Welsh O level. I mean, a lot of my school friends their first language was Welsh. And they all did do the Welsh O level. And it was not considered to be something that we would find necessary. And my goodness, it has become something I've found necessary, because I did a drama in Wales 3 years ago, I think. And I had to learn Welsh for that.
How did you find learning it at sort of a later stage in your life versus as a child by osmosis?
As an actor, you're always having to take something on, some new thing. So it didn't feel different from that, but it was extremely hard to feel confident in it, I think. And I feel very inferior being able to speak Welsh in Wales by that. And so that was almost made it hard to be that person who couldn't converse easily in Welsh. My niece is a fully fluent Welsh speaker, and she was the person who mainly taught me, because it was only in front of her. She's only 19 at the time, 18, 19. And it was only in front of her that I could be, when you learn a language, you've got to be prepared to look an absolute idiot a lot of the time.
Yes.
And it was only in front of her that I felt really able to be that. The rest of the time, I was still pretending that I could actually speak better than I can.
Well, when you received your BAFTA, you said thank you, and it was...
Yeah, I do. Really Wales school.
So you wanted to be an actor as a small child. However, your career started in earnest when you were 35. Can you tell us about your journey?
How long have you got?
Plenty of time.
So I did want to be an actor, and I felt that was just a natural direction for me. And in fact, I did apply for English and drama courses at a lot of universities, towards as I was doing my A levels. And I also applied to Queen's because it was the first year of women here. And I had been quite informed by my art teacher and my drama teacher about sort of what I now know is second wave feminism.
Yes.
And to have the honor of being in the vanguard of women's progress into these colleges meant something huge to me historically. It still does. I mean, I don't think anybody would dispute that. But what it meant, of course, coming here was that then this college was not really prepared, I don't think.
I was going to ask you that. Were they prepared for you?
And so to feed it into being an actor, it meant that the first year, I didn't know how to navigate it. Plus, I'd done fourth term exam and so on. So I just hadn't no experience. These girls' boarding schools, feeling like I was a rebel. Well, I was privileged, little girl who didn't know anything about anything. And so coming here, that first year was a disaster, but I pulled myself together just before May Week and said, listen, you came here to do acting. So that I mean, I know that's not what you're meant to come here for, but
I thought it was history.
to the first part one law. I thought, well, that's what I want to do. So I went and did a couple of auditions and got some roles for the summer. So I went and did a play in Harlow, to Edinburgh with Sydney Sussex, actually, and did theirs. And then after that, it was like, bam, I was in. I did 21 plays in the remaining
That's
2 years.
incredible. Wow. Wow, that's
Does that sound shocking to everybody? I had this wonderful moment when Vic Gattrell, who was teaching me at Keys for history, I would go to see him once a week with my supposed essay, and very rarely would there be an essay to read to him, and he was jolly cross with me. And then we did a competition, the National Student Drama Festival, this festival, which I don't say to show off, but merely to show Vic Gattrell's extraordinary approach to that. So he then, when I got back at the beginning of the next term, there was something in my pigeonhole. Sorry, those don't still exist. In the same way, there's a card from him saying, "I'm so sorry that I gave you such a hard time about not producing any essays for me. I didn't realise he was serious about it." And I thought that was just an amazing thing, because it then endorsed, yes, I am actually serious about it. And I was serious about it. But I left here unable to get any kind of movement forward. I just didn't know what to do. And at the same time, my parents, who'd been, well-to-do all through that childhood and all through that education, suddenly their business completely collapsed and they had absolutely nothing.
Oh, gosh.
And so they couldn't help me. They couldn't help me either find somewhere to live or send me to a drama school for a postgraduate year or any of the sort of routes that might have worked. And I found myself I was on E Staircase there, and this beautiful Tudor, wonderful college, visually and historically and academically and in every sense. And I found myself within moments in a council flat in Bermondsey, sharing with a friend. Wow. And the shock, and then prior to that, of course, the green grass of Wales, Right. So really, and to my inner confidence was huge. But it was the very best thing that happened to me, because there was an extraordinary coincidence that up the road in Rotherhithe, there was an organisation called Rotherhithe Theatre Workshop, which was actually run by Dartington College of Arts, and it was for their 4-year degree in performing arts, right. And it was it was a hub of the most radical thought about community theatre. So I qualified as a member of the community by living in one of these council flats and being unemployed, actually being on Mrs. Thatcher's enterprise allowance scheme, £39 a week. And I qualified for that as being a member of the community, and I suddenly just got myself something to do every day. Right. And I started making theatre in interesting ways under the leadership of now. And his great statement has been, since academically, has been about trying to reconfigure the notion of Peter Brook's empty space. So everything that the black box theatre of the 1970s was all about, which was, we have this sort of sacred place, which is tabula rasa, and into it we create, into it we perform, we make, we bring in things and we make it. And that sort of ground zero purity of theatre making. Alan's proposal and the Dartington, and actually Dartington was very connected to Exeter's department at the same time, was no, you can't, there is no as creators. And you have to embody that point for me. One that I'd done here essentially came out of a classical tradition, and suddenly I met another tradition that was an answer or in dialogue with the classical work. And I have to say, as it were, but it was such an amazing thing. And I mean, I don't know what the words are to describe what has happened to that piece of land since 1983. And it had started before that with the London Docklands Corporation. So I learned that we have baggage. And our baggage is actually the essence of what we need to work with as artists.
And what
went from, as I say, we don't choose and I'd started acting professionally, but I had to have a sort of day job every so often. At this point.
Oh wow. Okay.
So I was working. Extra money. These focus groups are really interesting these days because everybody's using them. You know, even the Labour Party are using these focus groups, and they're really exciting. And you can go, because you're an actor, you can go and be anything you want and tell them that you're, you know, a housewife with 2 kids, and that you're and you can go and do that if you like, and it's 50 quid and it's cash. So I said,
role play.
Brilliant, Diana, brilliant. I'm going to go and do it. So I did a couple of these focus groups, pretending not, you know, there was a demographic that they were trying to get together in the room, and I just pretended I was what it was. I realised it's a lie and not something to be proud of. However, so when I went for the audition to the thick of it, I said, Armando was saying, well, we're thinking about having a story where a woman comes in from a focus group. And I said, oh, well, I've just done a focus group. And I told him this whole story. He was, his mouth was on the floor.
I can imagine.
He was, you are kidding me. The whole Labour Party policy is being developed out of with groups of people who are faking it. And so he made that the storyline for one of the first episodes. And at the same time, I told him about my experiences in the interim years, the wilderness years. I'd worked at the Arts Council, and I told him about my life as an arts bureaucrat and about various people that I came across there. And so he created Terry, who sort of came out of my experience. But I can't honestly say I wrote that. I think it's very much Armando that wrote that, or Jesse Armstrong was also part of that team, Simon Blackwell, Tony Roach, all the people who are very famous for Succession now.
But they really saw you as a person and wrote it around you and your experiences.
Interestingly, most of the actors, the original cast anyway, for The Thick of It were also writers. Okay. And I didn't realise that until a few years later. And I thought, oh, actually, apart from James Smith, who played Glenn, everybody else were fairly experienced writers. So they were coming to act, but I think the bits of their writing brain were being harnessed in the same
channeled into
process.
this. Wow.
Yeah.
So you have been incredibly outspoken about mental health, its importance, and about seeking help. And as a younger person, you say you had to overcome extreme fatigue, which ultimately led you to acting. Can you talk a little bit about that and how important it is to you, and any message that you would like to convey around that to us this evening?
So those feelings that I sort of bundled away as a little girl, they came back to bite me. So in those years in my 20s, when I was working at Rather High Theatre Workshop and then in higher education and then at the Arts Council, I just was not living the life that I think I was meant to live, whatever that means, or how I felt I was going to offer something to the world. I felt I was teaching, but I was not teaching well. You know, I couldn't do things well.
It was not your best self.
It was not my best self. I was actually a very poor teacher in my view, and so the reason for all of that was that I wasn't feeling. I had periods of extreme depression, and just being unhinged, really. And then one day I just had a major collapse in that I couldn't do anything. I couldn't walk. I just was crying. I felt ill. I thought I had flu. I didn't know what was wrong with me. But it didn't get better the next day or the next day or the next day or the next day for a year. And I was so surprised. I thought, I don't know what to do. The doctor was worried and so forth, and the GP sent me to the local hospital to be examined by the consultant physician, diagnostician, just to have a look at, check out there wasn't anything organic wrong with me, blah, blah, blah. He did all that, he did my reflexes, etc. Sat me down and said, nothing wrong with you in organic terms, but is there anything else I think he asked me maybe about my dreams. He said, do you have many dreams? Not particularly, that I'm aware of. And he said, is there any other job you ever wanted to do?
Oh, wow.
And I said, yes, I wanted to be an actor. And he just looked at me and said, really simply, well, I think if you don't go back to acting, you will be ill for the rest of your life.
Gosh.
And that might be a sentence that I would never have remembered if I hadn't felt it to be completely true. It was like something going, physically hitting me in my sternum. I thought, no, it's true. And then I thought, but what does that mean? If to be an actor, I'm already 30, whatever. All my friends from Cambridge, of course, you know how well people do from Cambridge, had these wonderful careers. They were world famous by this point. How could I then step up and say, I'd like to do that too? So I then set about the challenge of I think, trying to manage my mental health.
Right.
Because I knew that unless I did so, I would never find the authentic me, and I'd never find the way and the means to continue in the path that I think I should have been on.
So work was a big and important outlet in managing that.
Yeah.
And how did you manage your well-being?
Well, it wasn't really doing the job that was going to make the difference. It was preparing to do the job.
Right.
So I started therapy, proper therapy. I say proper therapy, that's no aspersions cast on any other kind of therapy. But I was doing I saw a therapist 3 times a week for, I think, 5 years.
Big endeavor. Yeah,
God, that's
exhausting.
a commitment.
Yeah.
That is a commitment. But I knew that unless I did it, the reason I knew was because I was already starting with kind of really delusional, paranoid thoughts. And I knew I don't know if anybody else has ever experienced any mental health crises, but often you can be in parallel in your own mind.
Right.
So there's one part of your mind which is convinced of one thing, or in my case, there was one part of my mind which was convinced of something, that I was blah. It might be, one of the fantasies I had, delusions I had, was that the real reason there was something wrong with me was that I had AIDS. So I was convinced I had AIDS.
Right.
No amount of AIDS testing would have proved to me otherwise. And then another part of my mind knew that that was delusional. Right. And I could see that the
and you
two
were living
things
in
were,
this.
they're living alongside each other, these two opposing and contradictory thoughts. So the other bit of me, let's say, I'm sure if there's anybody here who's an expert in psychiatry or psychology will be able to tell me what the names of these parts of the mind are. But another part of me thought, right, you've got to deal with that. You've got to go and do something. And I thought, well, what can I do? I'd read lots and lots about psychoanalysis and how useful it was. I thought I'll do that. And thankfully, again, I still didn't have very much money.
Right.
The British Association of Psychotherapists ran a scheme whereby you could have this kind of work for £10 a session.
Gosh.
Which made
Thank
it
God.
possible for me to do that. And I worked with an absolutely wonderful woman for all those years. And she was very enabling somehow, without ever being prescriptive.
Right.
And I remember the point when I dared to say to her, and it must have been at least 2 years in, I'd like to be an actor. And I thought I could hear all the judgment that she was going to have. What? You're going to go and be an actor? That's a very silly profession. Don't bother with it. And I think she perhaps did think that, but she didn't say so.
She didn't say so.
Well, she never said very much, to be honest with you. That was ever discernible in that way.
But she gave you a very safe environment.
But she gave me a place in which I could, when you're doing that kind of psychoanalysis, you lie on a couch and you can't see your therapist, they're behind you. But in front of me, much like the lovely Queens, was a Samuel Palmer painting, a print of a Samuel Palmer painting. I don't know if anybody knows Samuel Palmer's work, but it was a picture of a sort of man, sort of in a smock, kind of rural-looking fellow with a dog beside him, holding a staff and walking along a pathway at night towards a moon. And that image just became my metaphor.
Yes.
And I don't know whether I was the man in the smock, the dog, the staff, or the moon, but somewhere in the mix there was something that spoke to me about a pathway. Right. And healing.
And you started working,
and then the work actually began. I began to get the job. I left my job at the Arts Council. I got my first acting job. And really after that, I never felt I was in the wrong place. I felt I was in the right place.
Wow, what a journey. Joanna, you have a talent for delving into the complexities of human emotions and motivations. As we hear your life story, that's evident in and of itself. But it adds layers to your performance. I was absolutely captivated with your performance in the Aleem Khan's film After Love, for which you won your BAFTA. And if it was up to me, I'd be giving you 2 BAFTAs on the same evening. What an incredible film, and what an incredible story. How did you prepare for it? You were so immersed in the culture. the Muslim religion, the spectacular with spectacular credibility. And I don't say that easily. Your empathy in the role, the way you straddled and dealt with those very difficult emotional issues. I think anyone who sees that film could put themselves into those roles and into that situation. And it is, how did you do that? How did you even begin to prepare?
I was lucky. So the writer was the director, and I think that helps because there's a sort of solid integration between what you're being asked to do and what is on the page. So Aleem Khan had written and was directing for the first time, and he had based the story partially on his mother's experience. So, and his mother's experience, both his parents' experience, is absolutely an extraordinary story. In the 1970s, she was a teenager living in a tower block in Tower Hamlets, white working class girl, and her father was a communist. So she came from this communist family, and into the tower block arrived a young Pakistani boy who had come to live with his aunt and uncle, sent from Pakistan, aged about 17 or something like that. And it's one of those tower blocks, most of them have been demolished now, but where they had the stilts underneath, the brutalist, beautiful, I love brutalism buildings. And they would play and hang out in that area of where the sort of piers are underneath the building. And they fell in love. So she was 14 or 15 and he was 17. Well, because her father was a communist, he was an internationalist. So where one might have expected a kind of white working class kind of closing of the doors against immigration, he welcomed it. Probably proselytizing for communism on the way, but the two fell in love. And eventually, I won't go through the full story, did manage to marry, and they had 6 children. She converted to Islam as part of this process. So when I was offered the role, which I did have to audition with, along with a lot of my friends, we were all sharing notes about how the process had been of auditioning. When that happened, Aleem and I talked a lot about Islam. Of course, he's a young, gay Muslim, in a very different world from the one his mother had grown up in, and the character would have grown up in, a very different universe. But he nonetheless wanted to honour his parents' story to a certain extent. So I learned a lot technically about Islam and about the sort of the theory of what it would be to be in that family. But I met his mother, and as soon as I met her, I knew who the character was. And it wasn't that she's a replica of Mary is a replica of her as a person, but there's a certain quality within her that was the only thing I ever really thought about playing the role. Whenever I felt like, what am I supposed to be doing here? I just go back into my memory of the exchanges I had with her, and her humility, her generosity, her open-hearted way of looking at the world was something that it was quite rare. It's quite a rare quality. I also spent as much time as I could, I went to the mosque, the Central Mosque in Regent's Park. I went incognito, and I had such a lovely time in the mosque. I mean, obviously I've been to mosques before, but when they're, as a tourist or as for something about the architecture or whatever, not as a worshipper. And there I was in this women's section, feeling, just this deep calm, this deep sense of calm, and the way that the prayerfulness was also mixed up with real life. I thought that was quite distinct. There was people checking things on their phone, but then also praying and, all the preparation of the washing and so forth.
Right.
I kind of love the ritualistic aspects. And most importantly for me, I could grab hold of a lot of these ways of conducting oneself because I'd gone through a pre-Vatican II Catholic education.
Right. Wow.
So I think the pre-Vatican II is the relevant bit because I remember the Angelus bell going and having to pray at 12 o'clock.
The ritualistic
Yeah.
portion of it was extraordinary how you handled that.
And I felt safe in it.
Absolutely
I felt I loved it. I wanted the kind of I wanted faith in action. I mean, faith is something that fascinates me.
I was mesmerized by. I literally was sitting there. I could not even look away for a minute. You were out. It was outstanding.
I did have to learn the Arabic pronunciation
very, very well.
and the Urdu, which was really hard. The Arabic pronunciation was very difficult. And that's not least because the way that each sort of geographical location of Islam pronounce is slightly different.
Yes.
So in Pakistan, it is slightly different from Saudi or something like that.
Right.
But in fact, the moment when it all came together for me was when Talid, who plays the boy, Solomon, in the film, his mother came one day. We were in Dover and she was there to help him and just accompany him. And she was from Syria, living in France, living in Paris, and she was from Syria. The most beautiful woman with a huge amount of grace. And I said, I'm really struggling with this prayer, and please, is anything? Could you say it for me? And I said, can I just record it? And she said, yes, I will. And she recorded the prayer, and the way in which she said it, it was then that I could hear the spirituality of it. That was the first time I heard the spirituality of the prayer, having listened as many versions as I possibly could. Right. And thereafter, I knew who Mary was in terms of how she felt about prayer.
Yes.
And the role of it in herself.
Yes. And how devoted she was in her role as that person for many years that she'd become.
That she became, yeah.
Really.
But I think overall, my approach, I haven't got one other than be curious and a bit magpie-like. I'll take it wherever I can find it, but I know it's not me. So I have to go outside of myself to look.
Well, but ultimately, when you're in it, one can't tell the difference between the role and you become, it's extraordinary how you do that.
Thank you.
So I love watching the Oscars and the BAFTAs. And I have to say, I have never watched anyone accept an award that is obviously a surprise. And you were up against Lady Gaga and all of these incredible, people that we all know. But you were so self-possessed. You got up there and gave the single most eloquent speech of thanks for this award that I've ever heard, because most of the time I go, can you believe this speech? It blows my. Have you always been self-possessed? How did that moment feel? Can you share that with us?
Oh, I wasn't remotely self-possessed, but I can give I can give a fake version of it, because when I was in the Anglican school. Yeah. The third school I went to, I had, as I said, many wonderful drama teachers, and there was we had a session that was called elocution, and it was called private elocution, and Betty Lowe, who only died last year, and she's, I think, very nearly 100.
Wow.
When she died, so she was quite elderly. Sure. She would teach me. What she called, I think it was called within it, public speaking. So every week I would be given a topic. I'd have to go away and research it and then come back and do a 5-minute talk.
Okay.
Week after week after week. And I'm afraid it's that kicked in that moment, because I was inside. I can tell you, I felt like I'd been hit by a pantechnicon. I felt like a car crash. It was so terrifying.
Can you imagine?
But then Betty Lowe, you know, she just came in and said, "You've got to marshal your thoughts, think quickly." And
you were flawless. It was unbelievable. I know.
But I think public speaking is something that's really a very valuable skill to learn, and it's not something that comes naturally. Who does it come naturally to? I'm sure there's nobody in this room who feels like, well, just you know, I had to learn what to do, how to think a little bit ahead of what you're saying.
How did that moment feel? Was this a dream? Was it something that you were looking at? This would never happen to me. How did that culminate?
There's lots of imposter syndrome feelings, as I have right now. But I try not to listen to that too much, because it wouldn't help. Do you know, the feeling, the biggest strange feeling was one of relief. It wasn't really joy. It was kind of quiet sense that, and matched with a sense of optimism that potentially it would mean that more opportunities to do interesting things.
All my work's not been for naught.
But at the same time as thinking, gosh, I'm jolly old for this, and you know, there's not much time left, and you know, so bring it on. You know, kind of slight race against the clock. But it had been a very convoluted journey. Very convoluted, and at one level, that everything I ever did contributed to it. You know,
getting there.
You know, when people say have a nice day or have a good day or whatever, I always think, no, please don't say that, because it might be really important for me that I have a bad day. That a bad day might do me more good than a good day.
Normally it does, right?
Yeah. Because you know, it's integration of all of those experiences that can lead one to a more authentic experience, I think, a more authentic way of living.
I know there's a lot of people that are going to be wanting to ask you questions, but I'd like to end this port. Is there anything that you have yet to do that you would like to do? If you look back and sit back.
So much. So I honestly feel like I'm just graduated. It's just,
You're at the President's Lodge.
I was thinking this today. I was thinking, do you think it's really too late for me to start to do an MBA? Mohammed might be able to tell me. You know, I suddenly thought, no, I think I've got a whole. I want to do more education. I want to do more leadership. I want to give more and more constructively, more effectively. I want to play. I want to embody something about the value of our cultural life in Britain.
Yes.
The pride with which we should hold our cultural life. How creativity is manifest in many forms, and how participation in creative activities is such a great thing for both our general productivity, but also our mental health, our sense of being grounded, our sense of connection, the way of us discovering and exploring meaning.
Right. And
without that, where would we go for it? It's so important, and I think there's a lot to be proud of in Britain. And you know, our education system is one, and colleges like Queen's represent that at the very highest level, and our cultural life is another.
That's right.
And I don't feel traditionally that we know the reasons for why the arts have been taken the pathways that they have in terms of funding. But yesterday, you know, the whole industry was literally jumping for joy at the announcement in the budget that films under a £15 million budget would now receive a 40% tax relief benefit. I mean, I had emails all afternoon from people who've been working on this for 7 or 8 years,
incredible.
because they feel there's something correct about that. The place of that level of storytelling in our culture advocates for all our interests.
But you were very instrumental in that, and you went to Downing Street and met Rishi, and
Yes.
did it all. So congratulations.
Yes, he's a Star Trek fan, I don't know, and a Star Wars fan, and
Star Wars fan.
both, all the stars.
Joanna, I'm going to open it up for some questions. Please just put your hands up, and anybody that has, there we have a question right there. Thank you.
Hi.
Please stand. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much. It's so great to hear that conversation. My name's May. I'm an English undergrad here in my final year. Also an actor, theatre maker. And yeah, I was just like really interested in what you were saying about like the role of community theatre, the role that the arts play in kind of like sharing stories, supporting stories, voicing stories. I think it's also really important. And yeah, I was just wondering like if you had any thoughts. This is kind of a broad question, but given like the current state right now in Gaza and in the West Bank, where we're seeing artists who are being silenced, we're seeing theatres which are being shut down, and kind of like those community spaces like being completely like eradicated. Like what community groups and community theatres and like artists and artistic kind of like places and spaces in the UK can do to kind of like expand that sense of community to become one of international solidarity to those artists.
Well, I did a lot of Augusto Boal work when I was starting at Dartington, through Dartington, where you would take a space and through a series of very prescribed processes, you would then examine conflict and difficulty. And you take it head on. And I think that's where dialogue and the process of examination can take place within a boundaried setting, which the arts provide, I think. You could, because it's a world of imagination, you can explore everything within it. Injustice and war is something that is the legacy of horror that develops from those conflicts is so huge. The only means really of being able to process is through our cultural experiences. And so I would advocate that there is as much conversation and dialogue as is possible within the boundaries of our own country, and that we extend to that global community as much as we possibly can. Because most artists will always say to you, you know, we're not of any nation.
Joanna, yeah, right.
We're one. We're one nation. We're one people.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm a PhD student. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about how the UK film and TV industry has evolved throughout your time in it. Do you think it's changed for the better, for the worse? And do you have any pieces of advice for young actors starting out?
I wish I did. I did, because it has changed greatly. So a lot of the routes that when I learned, you've got to get a headshot and go to a professional photographer and have that taken, and then get some stamped addressed envelopes and send off these postcards to potential casting directors or agent. I mean, that just doesn't exist. Right. And technology has entirely obliterated the means that I had at my disposal. That said, I think there's some principles that probably always remain in terms of getting one's career and so forth going. And that is take as much charge of it as you possibly can. So having said that, I wait for the jobs to come to me, I also try to constantly put ideas out there and communicate with people. about what I think I can offer. TV and film has changed so much. It's not the same business, and I mean today, there's a lot of talk in the last. So recently, the hits of COVID, followed by the strikes, followed by our borderline recession,
Right.
and the global challenges of where money stays and where it goes to, all have made everybody very depressed in television. I've had a series of emails today from people saying, half the workforce, more than half the workforce, I think, is out of work in TV. The huge number of studios that were mentioned in Jeremy Hunt's budget are actually empty at the moment. He mentioned a couple of films that are being made there, but most of them are empty. All the drivers and the facilities vans are all sitting there with nobody using them. So at the moment, it is not a good thing. But arguably, it's a correction from a vast expansion of in the industry through the streamers and through the new model of ownership. I mean, business is at the root of how this has all been working. And so once you moved away from a public funded system with 3 channels or whatever,
Right.
to a streamer-led, venture capital supported system with subscribers, the whole thing has expanded and then is now contracting. So I'm no business person. I do not know how that is going to level out. But I think as an artist, I can't even think about it. This is partly why I was thinking about doing my MBA. But as an artist, that's not really my job. My job is to think about people and how they conduct themselves in our world, what their motivations are, and how to make something that communicates and is entertaining. And because in a way we are all now television makers.
Right.
We're all television makers.
Right.
We can make right now. Well, we're making a show right now. It's I think getting into the actual means of production is where it's at for young, just when you start out, because you can.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, between Netflix and Amazon, everybody's making movies.
Yeah.
There's not MGM, and it's just quite. It's
There's a
everything.
kind of democratization,
Yes.
and at the same time a dilution and a
Yes.
vulnerability.
Right.
Nothing is very solid, but there's a lot of it.
A lot of it. Yeah. There were quite a few. Yes, go ahead. Yes, Nathaniel, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. It's been very interesting to hear about your journey to stardom. Obviously, you've worked in both TV and film. Film, obviously, due to the nature of films, a lot more condensed in storyline and characters compared to TV's shows that are more, they just have more time to develop things. Do you prefer working in TV or film, and do you find one easier than the other to get to grips with a character?
Well, the way I think about it personally is that as an actor in television generally, it's very narrative driven TV. There is a narrative that you're conveying at every point, and it's very well thought through, and it's often the characters who are responsible for that narrative. So an actor, I feel as an actor, I'm sort of telling a story in most TV, particularly TV drama. In a film, generally, the narrative, the responsibility for the narrative doesn't really rest with the actor. The narrative is being constructed through the edit in a way that is very different from most television making. Because, at the most extreme, next episode, press now or you're going to miss the next episode as it's become on television for binge watchers. But that is never going to be the case for a film. A film is going to have that moment when you get 6 or 7 minutes worth of credits. And so the job for me as an actor in film, I always feel, is to just be that character in that moment. Whereas I never quite feel that that's enough for TV. And in fact, the way they write a lot of television shows that. So, you might get at the end of a scene, you'll get end on Beth. And so end on Beth means we're looking at Beth's face and she's going to tell us what she feels about the fact that he's just dumped her,
Right.
And then that's going to, or she's going to be vengeful. Oh, okay. So we're moving now into the revenge narrative, whatever that is. But that would never happen in film. I don't generally. I mean, that's probably all those rules are there to be broken, aren't they? But I feel that my job is just to feel what it is to be that person, and then the director and the editor will do what they like with it.
Right, they put it together.
Which is why you can end up sort of cut out of a film very easily when it becomes not the story they want to tell.
Thank you. There were more questions. Please go ahead. Yes. Hi.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joanna, for sharing the story. I'm doing a PhD in film studies, so kind of yes, and very much interesting the story shared you. So, and part of your life is suffered from a kind of severe mental health issue, and then that's interesting for me because part of my thesis is talking about how film art is has a therapeutic function of film art, right? So I think somehow your personal experience seems to kind of align with my idea very much, but for you, it seems to be the case that because you always want to be an actor and you kind of repress that vocation, that desire, and that seems to be the problem why you have that depressions or mental health issue in the first place. But when thinking about, would you say, like, according to your personal experience, that acting or storytelling or embodying that journey is a therapeutic process some way that's kind of redemptive narrative in a way? Would you say so? I'd like to hear about your experience.
Thank you. Yes, but I feel I shouldn't say it. I shouldn't admit that because I don't think it's a very good reason to going into the profession. And also because that wouldn't be the case for everybody. I think there are many challenges within being a professional, working in professional TV, theatre, or film, which actually could, push you over the edge. Certainly not be therapeutic. So I don't feel it's universal. But for me, I would say yes. There is something therapeutic about, as you say, that embodiment. But I also think there's something therapeutic, and I don't know if this is related to how you're thinking in your PhD, but about going to the cinema, the experience as an audience member. And I can remember going as a teenager to our local, they built an arts centre, 70s black box arts centre called Theatre Clwyd when I was about 15, 16. And my brother and I, as soon as one of us could drive, we get in our car and drive the 20 miles to the cinema where the BFI put on various programs of work. And I remember us going to see Car Wash, the black car wash musical set in LA, on the edges of LA. And my mind exploding at the possibility of other lives, of living other lives. Mm-hmm. And then the following week, we went to see Visconti's Ludwig, about Ludwig of Bavaria, and which couldn't probably get two films that would be further away from each other. Diversion. But that's like, and there's that too. And that I feel opened up chambers of in me, which I think are a therapy. It is a therapeutic process. That wonderful moment when you come out of a great film, having seen it in the cinema with all the sound and the light, and you walk down the street and for a couple of 100 yards, you're still in the
there,
film.
yes.
You're still in wherever that might be,
That's right.
whether it's the desert or whether it's Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
And you're living it. And I think one of the barriers to mental well health, whatever that expression should be, mental ease is feeling a sense of limitation or block or
right.
barrier,
Containment,
and the openness of the experience of cinema, of being so sensorily connected to another world, which is quite unique, I think, to the experience of cinema. Theatre is very different. I think that is therapeutic.
Absolutely. We're going to take one more question. Go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for coming. Such an interesting talk. Something I've noticed and always wondered is that it seems actors who have had their breakthrough role or shot stardom through comedic roles often seem to do really, really well in other genres and give really compelling performances when they move into different genres away from comedy. And I was wondering if you've noticed that yourself, and if you think there's a higher bar for going into comedy, it's more difficult to work in these roles, or if there's something in comedy that really well prepares you for different types of roles.
Yes, thank you. Good question. Well, what's the phrase? Somebody's might have to help me out. Comedy is just tragedy faster, I think, played quicker. And I think there's something of the truth in that, certainly myself, just as an actor, just on a technical level, if something it should be funny and it isn't funny, if I say it quicker, it becomes funny. And that,
Right.
any good director will say, just say it quicker. And it often works.
It's all about timing, right?
Timing. Exactly. But you could be trying to get the juice out of some sentence and killing it dead. But I do think about myself that the reason I was in comedy is because I was fat. So I think it started out, I would have been if I'd been thin at 18, 19, 20, I would have been off in playing Ophelia. I think a lot of it's like how you look physically. And I'm not saying that there isn't a bit of my brain that sees the world as a series of jokes, because I think there is.
Yeah.
But something done by somebody who's, overweight has traditionally meant things it's signifying to an audience. Perhaps at the very worst level, it's signifying their experience should not be noted as your experience. A kind of othering, which then allows some comedic space, I think, at the worst. But I think I'm not sure there's necessarily a best, but for me, being overweight was always about translating as being empathetic, caring. There's a whole series of things that go with casting that are really part of that conversation. And then age comes in, then suddenly you're a bit older. So then you can play a mum, or you can play a grandmother, or you can play a woman in the work space, which, when you're very young, that doesn't necessarily work either. And I think comedy and tragedy and comedy and drama fall somewhere into that same marshalling of casting decisions. I also think that what makes something funny, and filming anyway, is in the screen is the frame you choose to put around that event. So coming in here doesn't often doesn't often read as funny. But, you know, something where you get a whole body shot or a two shot or something, or you can cut and change your timing in the edit. Those sorts of moments can make something funny. I mean, I think Armando's show, The Thick of It, is a very good example of that, where he had, you know, supposedly the mockumentary, and it's why the mockumentary has worked comedically, because this camera is constantly changing the point of view. Who is the person looking, and why are they looking? And if they're looking in this dispassionate way, they don't care. This person clearly doesn't care. Then we've got some distance, and that distance allows us to laugh. Whereas if it's all up here, it's not going to be that funny. So I, as an actor, tend not to do anything differently in either category. I just try and be as what they call truthful. It's a bit of a code, that, but truthful as possible to my character's motivation and her experience.
Joanna, if you look back today, what would you say in closing to your younger self?
Keep on keeping on. You know, it's not over till it's over.
Right.
And I genuinely think this, that it is the doing that is the value. I don't go to work, and at any point actually, whether it was professional work or working in a, you know, as I now do in community theatre in Croydon or wherever else, I don't go and do that for an end result. Right. I do it because the doing, the journey, is the reward in itself. Right. And I genuinely think that that's the case, and therefore there's not that much you should worry about, because, you know, just do it. As I think it was Nike said. But the doing is where it is its own reward, I think. And the days go by, and hopefully the Rolling Stone does gather some moss.
Yeah. Well, I've heard you say that, you know, if you're stuck, just make some soup, go for a walk, go and do something.
Yeah.
Because the rest takes care of itself.
Yeah. That energy. I mean, we haven't talked at all about energy, which is probably the actor's main tool, but you know, it's energy creating energy. Exactly. Momentum creating momentum.
Joanna, thank you so much. What a fascinating discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending this evening, for a very memorable evening. Thank you all. Thank you. And thank you.